In the deep northern forests of North America, where winter once ruled the land for more than half the year and survival balanced on a knife's edge, stories carried more than entertainment. They carried instruction, memory, and warning. Among the Ojibwe, Cree, Innu, Naskapi, and other Algonquian-speaking peoples, few stories were as feared or as carefully told as those of the Wendigo. To speak of the Wendigo was to speak of hunger, not simply of the body but of the spirit. It was to acknowledge that there were forces in the world that did not merely kill, but hollowed people out, leaving behind something that only resembled humanity. The Wendigo is often misunderstood as a simple monster, a creature of antlers and claws that stalks the snowbound wilderness. In truth, the Wendigo is something far more unsettling. It is not born fully formed in the forest. It emerges from human failure, from desperation unrestrained by compassion, from the moment when survival eclipses morality. Unlike many mythological beings that exist entirely outside human society, the Wendigo begins within it. It is a warning carved into flesh and story alike, that there are limits which, once crossed, cannot be undone. The environments that gave rise to the Wendigo legend were unforgiving. Long winters froze rivers solid and buried game beneath deep snow. Famine was not an abstract concept but a recurring threat, sometimes claiming entire families or villages. In these conditions, survival depended on cooperation. Food was shared, elders were protected, and the group endured together or not at all. Isolation was dangerous. Hoarding was deadly. Cannibalism, even in desperation, was more than a physical act. It was a spiritual catastrophe. The Wendigo myth emerged from this reality, shaped by lived experience rather than imagination alone. To understand the Wendigo is to understand how indigenous societies encoded ethics into narrative. Stories were not separate from life. They were tools for living. The Wendigo taught listeners that hunger could erode the soul, that greed could transform a person into something unrecognizable, and that abandoning the community was the first step toward destruction. Children heard these stories not to frighten them without purpose, but to prepare them for the realities of the world they would inherit. Adults listened as reminders of responsibilities that did not disappear even in times of desperation. The terror of the Wendigo lies not only in its violence, but in its inevitability once transformation begins. Traditional stories emphasize that once a person becomes a Wendigo, there is no true return. The hunger never ends. Each act of consumption only deepens the curse, enlarging the creature while stripping away what little humanity remains. This permanence reflects a cultural truth. Some actions cannot be undone. The myth insists that survival at the cost of one's moral center is not survival at all. Importantly, the Wendigo is not merely a punishment imposed from outside. It is a reflection of internal collapse. Many stories describe the transformation beginning in the mind, with intrusive thoughts of hunger, suspicion toward others, and a growing desire to isolate. The forest does not corrupt the person. Rather, the forest becomes the stage upon which that corruption is revealed. In this way, the Wendigo myth speaks to psychological as well as spiritual realities, recognizing that extreme conditions can fracture the human psyche if left unchecked. The figure of the Wendigo also functions as a boundary marker between the human and the inhuman. While animals kill to survive and spirits act according to their nature, the Wendigo is monstrous precisely because it chooses excess. It eats not because it must, but because it cannot stop. This distinction is crucial. The Wendigo is not a predator in balance with the land. It is a consumer without limit. In cultures that viewed nature as a network of reciprocal relationships, such imbalance was the ultimate transgression. Over time, the Wendigo became more than a single story. It evolved into a shared symbol across many communities, adapted to local landscapes and traditions while retaining its core meaning. In some regions, the Wendigo was described as a towering, skeletal giant, its body stretched thin by starvation. In others, it appeared more human, walking among people until it was too late. Sometimes it was a solitary monster. Sometimes it was a spirit that possessed the vulnerable. These variations do not weaken the myth. Instead, they demonstrate its flexibility and relevance across generations. With the arrival of European colonizers, the Wendigo myth was often misunderstood, distorted, or dismissed. Missionaries and settlers recorded fragments of stories without grasping their cultural context, reducing complex moral frameworks to tales of superstition. Later, Western psychology attempted to categorize certain behaviors under the label of Wendigo psychosis, further stripping the myth of its spiritual and communal dimensions. Yet despite these intrusions, the Wendigo endured, preserved in oral tradition, memory, and evolving interpretation. In the modern world, the Wendigo has been appropriated into popular culture, transformed into a horror archetype divorced from its origins. Antlers were added, violence exaggerated, and meaning flattened. While these representations have made the Wendigo widely recognizable, they often ignore the values and warnings at the heart of the legend. For many indigenous people, this appropriation is not harmless. It represents yet another consumption of cultural knowledge without respect or reciprocity, an act that is, ironically, Wendigo-like in itself. At the same time, indigenous writers, artists, and thinkers have reclaimed the Wendigo, using it as a lens through which to examine modern forms of greed and destruction. In these interpretations, the Wendigo is no longer confined to frozen forests. It appears in exploitative industries, environmental devastation, addiction, and systems that feed endlessly while leaving communities hollowed out. This evolution does not betray the original myth. It fulfills it. The Wendigo was always meant to warn against forces that consume without care. This is not a case study to determine whether the Wendigo is a curiosity or a monster to be catalogued, but as a living narrative shaped by history, environment, and moral philosophy. By exploring its origins, its many forms, its symbolism, and its impact on Native American communities, we can begin to understand why this story has survived for centuries. The Wendigo is frightening not because it is strange, but because it is familiar. It asks an uncomfortable question. What happens when hunger, whether for food, power, or control, outgrows responsibility? The tales that follow will delve deeper into the Wendigo's creation, appearance, and meaning. They will examine the stories told around winter fires, the social structures shaped by fear of transformation, and the ways in which the Wendigo has been both misused and reimagined in the modern era. Together, they form not just a study of a myth, but a reflection on the fragile boundaries that define humanity itself. The origins of the Wendigo are inseparable from the land that gave it shape. Long before written records, before borders or nation-states, the northern forests of North America were home to peoples whose lives were governed by the rhythms of the seasons. Among Algonquian-speaking nations, such as the Ojibwe, Cree, Innu, and Naskapi, survival required an intimate understanding of nature's cycles. Summer brought abundance, but winter brought danger. It was within this seasonal imbalance that the Wendigo was born, not as fiction, but as a spiritual articulation of real and recurring threats. Winter in the northern woodlands was not merely cold, it was transformative. Snow erased familiar landmarks. Ice sealed rivers and lakes. Game animals migrated or became scarce. Travel slowed and isolation intensified. Communities clustered together not only for warmth, but for safety and sanity. In such conditions, hunger was not an anomaly, but an expected visitor, one that tested both bodies and values. The Wendigo myth emerged as a response to this pressure, encoding communal ethics into a story powerful enough to endure hardship and fear. In its earliest conceptualization, the Wendigo was not simply a creature lurking in the wilderness. It was a condition, a spiritual state that could arise when a person crossed a fundamental boundary. Many traditions describe the transformation beginning with starvation so severe that it fractures the mind. The afflicted individual becomes obsessed with food, suspicious of others, and increasingly isolated. Thoughts turn inward, then darker. When cannibalism enters the mind, even before it enters the body, the transformation has begun. This emphasis on thought is crucial. In Wendigo lore, the act of cannibalism is not always the first step. Sometimes the desire itself is enough. This reflects a worldview in which morality is not limited to behavior alone, but includes intention. To entertain the idea of consuming another person is to step outside the moral circle of the community. The Wendigo thus represents not only what people do, but what they allow themselves to become. In some traditions, the Wendigo originates not from starvation, but from greed. A hunter who hoards food, refusing to share during times of scarcity, risks becoming Wendigo-like even if they never taste human flesh. This version of the origin myth emphasizes that excess is as dangerous as desperation. Both sever the bonds that hold a community together. In this way, the Wendigo is less about hunger itself and more about imbalance, about taking more than one's share or prioritizing oneself at the expense of others. Other narratives describe the Wendigo as a pre-existing spirit, older than humanity, that seeks hosts among the vulnerable. In these accounts, the Wendigo is a force of winter and death, roaming the forests in search of those weakened by hunger or isolation. It whispers to them, appears in dreams, and feeds on fear. Once it takes hold, the person loses control, becoming an extension of the spirit's will. These stories reflect a belief in a world alive with unseen forces, where spiritual danger is as real as physical harm. Importantly, these two origin paths, transformation and possession, are not contradictory. They reflect different ways of understanding the same phenomenon. Whether the Wendigo arises from within or enters from without, the result is the same: the loss of humanity through unchecked hunger and isolation. This dual origin allows the myth to address both personal responsibility and external threat, acknowledging that while individuals make choices, they do so within environments that can overwhelm even the strongest. The geographic consistency of the Wendigo myth across Algonquian-speaking regions suggests that it developed organically in response to shared environmental challenges. The forests of the north are vast and unforgiving, capable of swallowing individuals whole. To disappear into the woods was to risk never returning. The Wendigo embodies this fear, transforming the unknown into a figure with intent. It is not merely that people vanish. Something takes them, something that was once like them. The seasonal timing of Wendigo stories further supports their origin as survival narratives. These tales were traditionally told in winter, when the Wendigo was believed to be most active. The act of telling the story itself was a form of vigilance, reminding listeners to stay close, to share food, and to watch for signs of distress among their kin. In this sense, the Wendigo myth functioned as an early warning system, a way of monitoring the mental and moral health of the group. Historical memory also plays a role in the Wendigo's origins. Oral traditions often preserve traces of real events, famines, disappearances, acts of desperation, transformed over time into symbolic narratives. It is likely that the Wendigo myth incorporates collective memories of starvation cannibalism, a reality faced by many societies under extreme conditions. Rather than record these events as isolated tragedies, the myth reframes them as spiritual cautionary tales, ensuring they are remembered without glorifying the act itself. This reframing is significant In Wendigo stories, cannibalism is never portrayed as a solution. It does not save the person, it condemns them. The Wendigo is not a survivor, but a warning. This stands in contrast to some colonial narratives that depicted indigenous peoples as resorting to cannibalism out of savagery. In reality, the Wendigo myth explicitly condemns such acts, emphasizing restraint, compassion, and collective responsibility, even in the face of death. The transformation into a Wendigo is often described as gradual, mirroring the slow erosion of social bonds. The afflicted person may withdraw from conversation, avoid shared meals, or express paranoia that others are plotting against them. These behaviors would have been immediately concerning in tightly knit communities. The myth thus provides a framework for recognizing and responding to mental distress, long before the language of psychology existed. Once the transformation is complete, the Wendigo is no longer considered human. This distinction is critical. The community's obligation to the individual ends when the individual abandons the community. This harsh boundary reflects the realities of survival in extreme environment. While compassion is valued, unchecked danger cannot be tolerated. The Wendigo myth acknowledges this painful truth without celebrating it. In some traditions, the Wendigo's origin is tied explicitly to broken spiritual laws. Disrespecting sacred rituals, mocking elders, or abusing spiritual power can all open the door to transformation. This reinforces the idea that the Wendigo is not merely about physical hunger, but about spiritual imbalance. The creature becomes a manifestation of what happens when a person loses respect for the forces that sustain life. The name Wendigo itself carries echoes of these meanings. Linguistic variations across tribes emphasize aspects such as evil spirit, cannibal, or winter being. The multiplicity of names reflects the myth's adaptability, allowing each community to emphasize the elements most relevant to their experience. Despite these differences, the core narrative remains consistent. The Wendigo is born when human need overwhelms human responsibility. Colonial contact disrupted the environments that had shaped Wendigo beliefs for centuries. Forced relocations, broken treaties, and the destruction of traditional food systems introduced new forms of hunger and trauma. In this context, the Wendigo myth took on additional layers of meaning. Some indigenous interpretations began to associate the Wendigo with colonial forces themselves, entities that consumed land, resources, and lives without restraint. This reinterpretation demonstrates the myth's resilience, its ability to evolve without losing its moral core. Anthropologists and missionaries often misunderstood the Wendigo's origins, interpreting it through Western frameworks that separated myth from reality. Reports of Wendigo-related violence were sensationalized, stripped of cultural context, and used to justify colonial intervention. These misinterpretations ignored the fact that the Wendigo myth existed precisely to prevent such violence by reinforcing communal ethics. Despite these distortions, the Wendigo's origins remain firmly rooted in indigenous knowledge systems. It is a story born from land, climate, and community, shaped by generations who understood that survival was not guaranteed and that morality mattered most when tested hardest. The Wendigo is not an abstract evil. It is hunger given form, winter given voice, and imbalance made flesh. To trace the origins of the Wendigo is to recognize that it is not a relic of the past. The conditions that created it, scarcity, isolation, fear, and greed, have not disappeared. They have merely changed shape. As long as these forces exist, the Wendigo remains relevant, reminding us that monsters are not always external threats. Sometimes they begin as choices made in desperation, and sometimes they are born when we forget that survival means nothing without humanity. The appearance of the Wendigo is inseparable from its nature. Unlike mythic creatures whose forms are fixed and symbolic, the Wendigo's body reflects its inner state. It does not merely look monstrous, it becomes monstrous as a consequence of what it is and what it has lost. Across Algonquian traditions, descriptions of the Wendigo vary, but all emphasize distortion, imbalance, and a grotesque exaggeration of hunger made visible. In many stories, the Wendigo is described as towering over humans, impossibly tall and skeletal, its body stretched thin as though pulled apart by starvation. Its ribs press visibly against its skin, its limbs appear elongated and angular, and its movements are unnaturally swift despite its gaunt frame. This contradiction, great size paired with extreme emaciation, captures the essence of the Wendigo's curse. It grows larger with every act of consumption, yet it never ceases to starve. The body becomes a visual paradox, reflecting a spiritual one. The skin of the Wendigo is often described as pale, gray, or ash-colored, sometimes resembling frost-bitten flesh or a corpse exposed to winter air. This coloration reinforces its connection to death and cold, as well as its liminal status between life and decay. In some accounts, the skin appears stretched so tightly over bone that it seems ready to tear, suggesting that the body itself cannot contain the hunger within it. The Wendigo is not simply thin, it is consumed by its own emptiness. Facial descriptions are particularly unsettling. Many traditions describe the Wendigo's lips as eroded or missing entirely, exposing jagged teeth stained dark by blood. This detail is not incidental. Without lips, the Wendigo cannot speak properly, cannot form human language, and cannot hide its hunger. Speech, a marker of humanity and social connection, is replaced by growls, screams, or the howling of the wind. When the Wendigo does speak, it is often said to mimic human voices, luring victims into the forest. This imitation is imperfect, reinforcing the idea that the Wendigo remembers humanity but cannot fully reclaim it. Eyes are another focal point. Wendigo eyes are often described as glowing, hollow, or burning with an unnatural light. They do not convey emotion in a human sense, but rather fixation. The gaze of a Wendigo is hungry, relentless, and devoid of empathy. To meet its eyes is to feel seen not as a person, but as meat. This dehumanizing gaze is central to the terror of the Wendigo, stripping victims of identity before violence even occurs. Some traditions incorporate animal features into the Wendigo's appearance, though these elements vary widely. Antlers, claws, or pointed ears may appear, blending human and animal forms into something unnatural. These features are not meant to suggest harmony with nature, as animal spirits often do in indigenous cosmology. Instead, they emphasize violation. The Wendigo is not an animal following instinct, nor a human guided by reason, but a corruption of both. Despite its monstrous size, the Wendigo is often described as eerily quiet. It moves through snow without sound, blending into the forest like a shadow. This silence reflects its isolation. Where humans gather, speak, and share warmth, the Wendigo hunts alone. The quiet it carries is the absence of community, the absence of song, laughter, and ritual. Even when it screams, the sound is said to echo unnaturally, as though the forest itself recoils. The Wendigo's connection to cold is fundamental. Many stories describe its heart as frozen solid, sometimes literally encased in ice. This frozen heart symbolizes the total loss of compassion, warmth, and relational connection. In some traditions, the heart must be destroyed to kill the Wendigo, reinforcing the idea that the creature cannot be defeated until its emotional and spiritual core is undone. Fire, warmth, and communal presence are thus positioned as opposites to the Wendigo's nature. Yet not all Wendigo stories emphasize a fully monstrous physical form. In some traditions, particularly those focusing on possession, the Wendigo may appear outwardly human for a time. These individuals may look normal but behave strangely. They withdraw from others, express paranoia, and exhibit an unnatural fixation on hunger. Their transformation is internal at first, making them more dangerous because they are not immediately recognized as a threat. This slow transformation is one of the most psychologically unsettling aspects of the Wendigo myth. It suggests that the boundary between human and monster is not fixed. It can erode gradually, unnoticed, until it is too late. The Wendigo does not always announce itself with claws and teeth. Sometimes it arrives as a thought, a fear, or a secret desire, growing stronger as it is indulged. The transformation process is often described as irreversible once it reaches a certain point. Early intervention through ritual, community care, or spiritual cleansing may save the afflicted. But once cannibalism occurs, or once the Wendigo spirit fully takes hold, the person is lost. This finality reflects a moral boundary that cannot be crossed without consequence. The myth insists that some actions fundamentally change who we are. As the transformation progresses, the individual loses their connection to the community. They may leave the village, wander into the forest, or actively avoid contact. This withdrawal is not just practical, but symbolic. Community is central to humanity in these cultures. To abandon it is to abandon one's identity. The Wendigo does not simply kill others, it first severs itself from relationship. Once fully transformed, the Wendigo is driven by compulsion rather than choice. Hunger becomes its defining force, overriding all other motivations. This is why the Wendigo is often described as tragic as well as terrifying. It is not portrayed as enjoying its violence in a sadistic sense. Rather, it is enslaved by its appetite, condemned to eternal dissatisfaction. This portrayal underscores the myth's moral lesson. Greed does not bring fulfillment, only endless craving. The Wendigo's unnatural abilities further emphasize its separation from humanity. It is often said to possess immense strength, capable of overpowering multiple hunters at once. Its speed allows it to traverse vast distances through snow and forest, appearing suddenly where it should not be able to reach. These abilities make it nearly unstoppable by ordinary means, reinforcing the idea that once transformation is complete, human solutions are insufficient. Despite this power, the Wendigo is not portrayed as clever in a human sense. It may be cunning in pursuit, but it lacks wisdom. Trickster figures and shamans often defeat it not through strength, but through intelligence, spiritual knowledge, or deception. This contrast reinforces the value placed on balance and thoughtfulness over brute force. The Wendigo is strong because it has abandoned restraint, but that same abandonment leaves it vulnerable. One of the most chilling aspects of the Wendigo's nature is its growth. Many stories describe the creature becoming larger with each person it consumes. This growth is not framed as improvement or evolution, but as grotesque excess. The more it eats, the less human it becomes, and the farther it moves from any possibility of redemption. The Wendigo thus embodies the idea that unchecked consumption does not lead to satisfaction, but to monstrous distortion. The Wendigo's relationship with smell is another recurring detail. It is often said to carry the stench of decay, announcing its presence before it appears. This odor serves both a practical and symbolic function. Practically, it warns potential victims. Symbolically, it marks the Wendigo as something already dead, even as it continues to move and kill. It is a walking contradiction, animated by hunger but devoid of life's warmth. In some traditions, the Wendigo is said to fear fire or warmth, retreating from camps and hearths. This fear reinforces the idea that communal spaces are protective. Fire is not only a physical defense, but a spiritual one, representing life, renewal, and connection. The Wendigo, born of cold and isolation, cannot endure such environments for long. The transformation into a Wendigo is ultimately a transformation of identity. Names are lost. Family ties are severed. The individual becomes an it, no longer referred to as a person. This linguistic shift reflects a profound cultural boundary. Humanity is not defined solely by biology, but by participation in community and adherence to shared values. The Wendigo crosses out of that definition entirely. This understanding complicates modern interpretations that portray the Wendigo as simply an external monster. In traditional contexts, the Wendigo is terrifying precisely because it begins as one of us. It is a mirror held up to human weakness, magnified by extreme conditions. Its appearance is not random, but meaningful, shaped by the values it violates. Through its body, the Wendigo tells a story. Every stretched limb, every exposed bone, every frozen feature speaks of excess, imbalance, and loss. It is hunger made visible, isolation given form, and moral collapse frozen into flesh. To look upon the Wendigo is to see what happens when survival is pursued without compassion, when desire overrides responsibility, and when the bonds that make us human are allowed to break. The Wendigo endures not because it is frightening, but because it is meaningful. Its power lies in symbolism that reaches far beyond the forests and winters from which it emerged. To indigenous communities who carried this story across generations, the Wendigo was never just a creature to be feared. It was a moral framework, a living metaphor for imbalance, and a way of speaking about the dangers that arise when human desire severs itself from responsibility. At the heart of the Wendigo myth is the concept of greed, not hunger, which is natural and unavoidable, but hunger without restraint. The Wendigo does not starve because food does not exist. It starves because it cannot stop consuming. This distinction is crucial. In Algonquian worldviews, need is acknowledged and respected, but excess is destructive. The Wendigo embodies excess in its purest and most terrifying form. Greed in this context is not limited to food. It encompasses any desire that places the self above the collective. A hunter who hoards meat while others starve, a leader who abuses authority, or an individual who prioritizes survival at the cost of community harmony, all risk becoming Wendigo-like. The myth transforms this abstract moral danger into something concrete and unforgettable. Greed becomes a monster that eats people. Isolation is the second pillar of the Wendigo's symbolism. Almost every Wendigo story begins with separation. Someone wanders too far from the group. Someone withdraws emotionally. Someone begins to distrust those around them. In environments where survival depended on cooperation, isolation was not just lonely, it was lethal. The Wendigo myth encodes this reality by portraying isolation as the gateway through which monstrosity enters. In traditional teachings, to be human is to be in relationship. Identity is not individualistic, but communal. A person exists through their connections to family, land, ancestors, and future generations. The Wendigo represents the severing of those connections. It walks alone. It eats alone. It dies alone. Even when surrounded by victims, it remains fundamentally isolated, incapable of true relationship. This symbolism extends to language. In many stories, the Wendigo loses the ability to speak properly. Its voice becomes distorted, animalistic, or imitative rather than expressive. Speech is more than communication. It is participation in shared meaning. When the Wendigo loses language, it loses the ability to exist within the moral and social world. Its screams are not conversation, but rupture. Another core symbolic dimension of the Wendigo is imbalance. Indigenous cosmologies often emphasize balance between forces, life and death, giving and taking, human and non-human. The Wendigo violates these balances completely. It takes without giving, consumes without replenishing, and lives without contributing. Its existence is parasitic, sustained only by destruction. This makes it not just dangerous, but cosmologically offensive. The Wendigo's association with winter further reinforces this imbalance. Winter itself is not evil. It is a necessary season, a time of rest and reflection. But endless winter is death. The Wendigo represents winter without end, cold without renewal. It freezes growth and halts cycles. In this sense, the Wendigo is not aligned with nature's rhythms, but opposed to them. Cannibalism, the act most closely associated with the Wendigo, carries layered symbolism. On a literal level, it is the ultimate taboo, a violation of bodily integrity and kinship. On a symbolic level, it represents consumption of one's own people, the destruction of the social body. To eat another human is to collapse the distinction between self and other, turning relationship into resource. The myth insists that cannibalism does not save the individual. Instead, it condemns them to endless hunger. This reflects a profound philosophical stance. Survival without ethics is meaningless. The Wendigo is alive, but it is not living. It exists in a state of perpetual deprivation, unable to enjoy what it consumes. This portrayal challenges narratives that justify harm in the name of survival. The transformation into a Wendigo also symbolizes the loss of identity. Names disappear, family roles vanish. The individual becomes a cautionary figure rather than a remembered person. This erasure reflects the belief that identity is sustained through relationship and responsibility. Without those, the self dissolves. Fear plays a significant role in the Wendigo's symbolism, but not in the way often assumed. The myth does not primarily instill fear of being attacked. It instills fear of becoming. This internalized fear encourages self-regulation and communal care. People are taught to watch themselves and each other, to intervene before imbalance becomes irreversible. This internal focus distinguishes the Wendigo from many Western monsters. Vampires, werewolves, and demons often represent external threats or curses inflicted from outside. The Wendigo, by contrast, emerges from within the community. It is born of familiar conditions and recognizable choices. This makes it more unsettling, but also more effective as a moral teacher. The Wendigo also functions as a warning against dehumanization. Once someone is seen only as a resource, violence becomes easier. The Wendigo reverses this process by showing where dehumanization leads. When people reduce others to meat, they themselves become monstrous. The myth thus reinforces empathy by illustrating the cost of its absence. In modern indigenous thought, the Wendigo has taken on new symbolic dimensions. Many writers and activists use the Wendigo as a metaphor for colonialism, capitalism, and environmental destruction. These systems consume land, labor, and lives without regard for balance or reciprocity. They grow larger as they consume more, yet remain perpetually unsatisfied. In this sense, they mirror the Wendigo perfectly. This reinterpretation is not a departure from tradition, but a continuation. The Wendigo was always a symbol of destructive consumption. Applying it to new contexts reflects the myth's adaptability and relevance. It allows ancient teachings to speak to contemporary realities without losing their ethical core. The Wendigo's symbolism also intersects with mental health. The gradual transformation, marked by paranoia, obsession, and withdrawal, reflects an understanding of psychological distress long before modern terminology. The myth acknowledges that extreme conditions can fracture the mind, and that such fractures require communal response, not isolation or shame. Importantly, the Wendigo myth does not frame suffering as weakness. It frames unaddressed suffering as dangerous. Hunger itself is not condemned. Abandonment is. This distinction reinforces the importance of care, generosity, and vigilance. Communities are responsible for one another, not only to prevent physical death, but to prevent moral collapse. The Wendigo's destruction, when it occurs, is often symbolic as well. Fire melts ice. Community confronts isolation. Ritual restores balance. These acts are not just about killing a monster, but about reasserting values. The defeat of the Wendigo represents the triumph of connection over greed, warmth over cold, and restraint over excess. Ultimately, the Wendigo symbolizes a fundamental truth that humanity is fragile. It must be maintained through constant effort, especially in times of hardship. The myth does not assume that people will always act ethically. It recognizes temptation, fear, and desperation, but it insists that choices still matter, and that some paths lead only to ruin. The Wendigo endures because it speaks honestly about the darkest possibilities of human behavior without surrendering to cynicism. It acknowledges that monsters can be made, not born, and that the line between human and inhuman is thinner than we might like to believe. At the same time, it affirms that this line exists, and that crossing it is neither inevitable nor without consequence. In this way, the Wendigo is not merely a symbol of evil. It is a symbol of warning, responsibility, and the profound importance of balance. It asks listeners to consider not just what they fear, but what they value and what they are willing to protect when survival itself is at stake. Oral tradition is the lifeblood of the Wendigo myth. Long before the story was written down, analyzed, or reshaped by outsiders, it lived in voices, gestures, pauses, and shared understanding. Among Algonquian-speaking peoples, stories were not static texts, but living processes. Each telling was shaped by context, audience, and season. The Wendigo, more than many figures, depended on this living transmission to retain its power. It was not merely recited, it was invoked with care. Wendigo stories were traditionally told in winter. This timing was deliberate and meaningful. Winter was when hunger pressed hardest, when nights were longest, and when the dangers the Wendigo represented felt closest. Telling the story during summer abundance would have weakened its force. In winter, listeners did not need to imagine starvation or isolation. They felt it. The story became a mirror of present reality, sharpening its warning. Storytelling often took place in communal settings, where families gathered close together. Elders spoke while children listened, absorbing not only the narrative but the emotional cues that accompanied it. Tone mattered. Long silences emphasized danger. Lowered voices signaled respect and caution. Sometimes names were avoided or the story was told indirectly, to prevent drawing unwanted attention. The act of telling itself was ritualized, reinforcing the belief that stories had power beyond entertainment. Wendigo stories rarely followed a single canonical form. Instead, they existed as cycles, clusters of related narratives that explored similar themes from different angles. One story might focus on a hunter who becomes lost and tempted by hunger. Another might tell of a village plagued by a Wendigo that was once a neighbor. Yet another might center on a shaman who recognizes the signs early and intervenes. Together, these stories formed a moral landscape rather than a linear mythology. A common pattern in these stories is the gradual emergence of danger. Rarely does the Wendigo appear without warning. Signs precede it. Strange behavior, unexplained disappearances, unsettling dreams, or an unnatural silence in the forest. These signs train listeners to be attentive, to notice subtle changes in themselves and others. The myth teaches observation as a survival skill. Dreams play a significant role in many Wendigo narratives. Dreams are often the first place where the Wendigo appears, whispering promises of relief from hunger or showing visions of food that turn into flesh. These dream encounters blur the boundary between spiritual and psychological experience. They suggest that danger does not always announce itself in waking life. Sometimes it enters quietly, through the mind. In some traditions, Wendigo stories are explicitly cautionary, ending with the monster's defeat. A group of hunters tracks the creature, using knowledge passed down from elders to destroy it. These stories emphasize courage, cooperation, and respect for tradition. The Wendigo is powerful, but not unstoppable. Knowledge, when shared and applied collectively, can overcome even the most terrifying threat. Other stories end less optimistically. In some versions, the Wendigo is never found. The forest remains dangerous. The lesson here is not triumph, but vigilance. Not all threats can be eliminated. Some must be managed through constant awareness and restraint. These endings reflect a realistic understanding of life in harsh environments, where survival does not always mean victory, but endurance. Trickster figures occasionally appear in Wendigo stories, though their role is often understated compared to other myths. When they do appear, they introduce ambiguity. A trickster may outwit a Wendigo through deception or humor, exposing its lack of wisdom. These stories remind listeners that intelligence and adaptability are as important as strength. They also prevent the myth from becoming purely grim, allowing space for resilience and creativity. Importantly, Wendigo stories are not always told from the perspective of victims or heroes. Sometimes they are told from the viewpoint of the community as a whole. These collective narratives emphasize shared responsibility. If someone becomes a Wendigo, it is not solely their failure. It is also a sign that the community did not intervene in time, did not share enough, did not notice the warning signs. This communal framing resists the idea of isolated blame. The Wendigo's former humanity is often emphasized in these stories. Listeners are reminded that the creature was once a sibling, parent, or neighbor. This detail deepens the tragedy and reinforces the moral stakes. The Wendigo is not an alien invader. It is a loss. Its destruction, when necessary, is mournful rather than triumphant. Rituals may accompany the act, acknowledging the life that was lost even as the threat is removed. Some oral traditions include stories of near transformations where individuals come close to becoming Wendigo, but are saved through intervention. These stories are particularly instructive. They highlight the importance of early response, compassion, and spiritual care. They also reinforce hope. Transformation is not inevitable. The community has the power to pull someone back from the edge. In these stories, elders and shamans play critical roles. They are the keepers of knowledge, able to recognize signs that others might miss. Their authority is not based on force, but on experience and spiritual insight. When they speak, others listen. This reinforces respect for wisdom and tradition, positioning them as essential tools for survival. The language used in Wendigo stories is often deliberately vague when describing certain details. This vagueness serves multiple purposes. It prevents the story from becoming too familiar, maintaining its power. It also allows listeners to project their own fears and experiences onto the narrative. The Wendigo becomes personal, shaped by what each listener brings to the story. Silence is another important element. Not everything is explained. Some questions are left unanswered. This mirrors the uncertainty of life in the wilderness, where not all dangers can be fully understood or controlled. The myth does not offer total mastery over fear. It offers guidance on how to live with it. Wendigo stories also function as historical memory. They preserve traces of past famines, migrations, and losses. While not historical records in a Western sense, they encode experiences in symbolic form. Through repetition, these experiences become part of collective identity, shaping how communities understand their past and prepare for the future. When colonial forces disrupted indigenous storytelling practices, Wendigo narratives were among those affected. Missionaries discouraged traditional stories, labeling them superstitious or dangerous. Some stories were suppressed, others were altered to fit Christian frameworks. Despite this, many Wendigo stories survived, adapted, and were passed down in private or coded ways. In the modern era, some Wendigo stories have been written down, translated, or shared publicly. While this has helped preserve them, it has also changed their nature. Written versions fix what was once fluid. They remove tone, context, and communal presence. This loss is significant, but not total. Many communities continue to tell Wendigo stories orally, maintaining their living quality. Contemporary indigenous storytellers often reinterpret Wendigo narratives to address current challenges. Addiction, environmental destruction, and social fragmentation are framed as modern forms of Wendigo influence. These new stories maintain the structure of traditional ones while shifting their focus. The monster remains, but its shape changes to reflect new realities. Despite these adaptations, the core function of Wendigo stories remains unchanged. They warn, they teach, they remind listeners that survival is not just about enduring physical hardship, but about maintaining moral and relational integrity. The stories insist that humanity is something that must be actively preserved. The Wendigo story cycle is not a closed system. It invites participation. Each generation adds its own experiences, reshaping the narrative without breaking it. This openness is part of the myth's strength. It allows the Wendigo to remain relevant without becoming rigid. In this way, Wendigo oral traditions are not relics of a vanished past. They are ongoing conversations about how to live under pressure, how to care for one another, and how to recognize danger before it consumes everything. The monster at the center of these stories is frightening, but the deeper message is one of responsibility and resilience. The Wendigo survives in story because it speaks to truths that do not expire. Hunger still exists, isolation still threatens, greed still corrodes. As long as these forces remain part of human experience, the Wendigo will continue to walk through narrative landscapes, reminding listeners of the cost of forgetting who they are and what they owe one another. The Wendigo was never confined to story alone. Its presence extended into social behavior, legal decision-making, spiritual practice, and the very structure of communal life among many Native American tribes. Far from being an abstract belief, the Wendigo functioned as a regulating force, one that shaped how people treated one another, how they responded to crisis, and how they understood responsibility in times of extreme hardship. To dismiss the Wendigo as mere folklore is to misunderstand the role myth plays in societies where story and survival are inseparable. In communities where winters could claim lives through starvation, disease, and exposure, social cohesion was not optional. The Wendigo myth reinforced this necessity by embedding consequences into narrative. The fear was not only of being killed by a Wendigo, but of becoming one. This internalized fear promoted self-monitoring and mutual accountability. People watched not just for physical signs of danger, but for behavioral changes that might indicate moral or psychological distress. Food-sharing customs were among the most directly influenced by Wendigo belief. In times of scarcity, hoarding was considered both dangerous and dishonorable. A person who refused to share risked suspicion, not merely of selfishness, but of spiritual imbalance. The Wendigo myth framed generosity as protection. To share food was to affirm one's humanity and commitment to the group. To withhold it was to step closer to the edge. This dynamic extended beyond material resources. Emotional support and inclusion were also critical. Individuals who withdrew from the group, avoided communal activities, or expressed paranoid thoughts were watched closely. Such behaviors were understood not as personal quirks, but as warning signs. The community bore responsibility for intervention. Isolation was not romanticized, it was feared. The Wendigo myth made clear that solitude could be lethal, both physically and spiritually. Elders played a central role in interpreting these signs. Their authority was grounded in experience and spiritual knowledge rather than coercive power. When an elder expressed concern about someone's behavior, it carried weight. The Wendigo myth reinforced respect for elders by positioning them as guardians against unseen dangers. Their guidance was seen as essential to communal survival. In extreme cases, belief in the Wendigo influenced decisions that modern audiences may find unsettling. Historical accounts describe situations in which individuals believed to be under Wendigo influence were restrained, exiled, or killed. These actions were not taken lightly. They occurred within a cultural framework that prioritized the survival of the group over the individual when the individual was perceived as an existential threat. Such decisions were shaped by the belief that once a person fully became a Wendigo, there was no return. The individual was no longer considered human in a moral or social sense. This classification was not dehumanization in the modern ideological sense, but a recognition of irreversible transformation within that worldview. The Wendigo myth provided a language for making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Colonial observers often misunderstood these actions, interpreting them as evidence of savagery or superstition. They failed to recognize the ethical reasoning embedded in the belief system. In environments where one person could endanger many, decisive action was seen as tragic but necessary. The myth did not erase grief, it contextualized it. The arrival of colonial legal systems disrupted these traditional frameworks. Indigenous laws, based on relational responsibility and spiritual balance, were replaced by external codes that did not recognize Wendigo belief as legitimate. This clash had profound consequences. Individuals who acted according to their cultural understanding of protection were criminalized under colonial law. In some documented cases, indigenous leaders who believed they were preventing Wendigo-related harm were arrested, tried, and imprisoned or executed. These trials often ignored cultural context entirely, framing actions rooted in communal ethics as individual crimes. The result was not justice, but further trauma, reinforcing the destructive impact of colonial imposition. This legal suppression did not eliminate Wendigo belief. Instead, it forced it underground. Communities continued to interpret behavior through the lens of the Wendigo, but with increased caution. Stories became quieter, warnings more subtle. The myth adapted to survive under scrutiny, much like the people who carried it. The cultural impact of the Wendigo extended into spiritual practice as well. Ceremonies emphasizing balance, renewal, and connection took on heightened importance as preventative measures. Maintaining spiritual health was seen as essential to preventing Wendigo influence. Songs, prayers, and rituals reinforced communal bonds and reaffirmed shared values. The Wendigo also influenced how communities understood mental and emotional distress. Behaviors that modern psychology might label as psychosis, depression, or paranoia were interpreted through a spiritual lens. This interpretation did not necessarily lead to cruelty. In many cases, it prompted care, ritual intervention, and communal support. The myth provided a framework for responding to distress without isolating the individual entirely. However, this framework had limits. When distress escalated into perceived danger, protective instincts took precedence. This tension reflects a broader truth about survival-based ethics. Compassion and caution must coexist. The Wendigo myth did not promise easy answers. It acknowledged the complexity of human behavior under extreme conditions. Gender roles also intersected with Wendigo belief in subtle ways. While most Wendigo figures in stories are male, women played crucial roles in prevention and response. They were often responsible for food distribution, caregiving, and maintaining social cohesion. Their vigilance helped identify early signs of imbalance. In some stories, women's intuition or intervention prevents transformation, highlighting their importance in sustaining community health. Children were not shielded from Wendigo stories, but neither were they traumatized by them. The stories were tailored to age and understanding. Younger listeners received simplified versions emphasizing safety and sharing. Older listeners encountered more complex narratives dealing with moral failure and consequence. This graduated exposure reflects a sophisticated approach to moral education. The Wendigo also shaped spatial behavior. Certain areas of the forest were avoided during winter, believed to be associated with Wendigo activity. These avoided spaces often corresponded to genuinely dangerous terrain. The myth thus reinforced practical safety measures through symbolic association. Over time, the Wendigo became embedded in cultural memory as both a threat and a teacher. It influenced how people remembered past famines, disappearances, and tragedies. Rather than recording these events as meaningless suffering, the myth framed them as lessons. Memory became purposeful, oriented toward preventing future harm. In the modern era, the Wendigo's social impact continues in transformed ways. Indigenous communities facing new forms of scarcity, economic marginalization, food insecurity, addiction, sometimes invoke the Wendigo metaphorically. It provides a language for discussing destructive cycles without individual blame, focusing instead on systemic imbalance. The myth also plays a role in cultural resilience. By preserving and teaching Wendigo stories, communities assert continuity with their past. They resist erasure by maintaining knowledge systems that colonial forces sought to suppress. The Wendigo, once used to justify colonial punishment, becomes a symbol of survival and resistance. Importantly, contemporary indigenous thinkers often emphasize that the Wendigo myth is not about fear-mongering. It is about accountability. It asks individuals to consider how their actions affect others, especially in times of stress. It demands awareness of one's own capacity for harm. The Wendigo's influence on law, behavior, and social structure illustrates the power of myth when it is integrated into daily life. It demonstrates that stories can regulate behavior as effectively as written laws, sometimes more so, because they appeal to emotion, identity, and shared values. To understand the Wendigo's social impact is to recognize that myth and reality are not separate domains. They inform and shape one another. The Wendigo walked not only in forests, but in decisions made around fires, in moments of crisis, and in the quiet calculations of survival. This legacy challenges modern assumptions about mythology as fiction. For the peoples who told these stories, the Wendigo was real in the sense that it shaped real choices with real consequences. Its influence can still be felt today in how communities discuss responsibility, care, and the dangers of unchecked desire. As long as societies face scarcity, isolation, and moral pressure, the questions posed by the Wendigo will remain relevant. How do we survive without losing ourselves? How do we protect the group without abandoning compassion? The Wendigo does not answer these questions easily. It forces them into the open, where they must be faced. Despite the terror surrounding the Wendigo, traditional Native American mythology does not portray it as invincible. Its power is immense, but it is not absolute. The belief that the Wendigo can be confronted, resisted, and sometimes destroyed is essential to understanding its role within indigenous worldviews. Without this possibility, the myth would collapse into despair. Instead, it offers a grim but necessary balance. While the Wendigo represents the worst outcome of moral and spiritual collapse, it also affirms that vigilance, knowledge, and communal action can hold that collapse at bay. The Wendigo's greatest weakness is the very thing that defines it, its hunger. This hunger is not simply physical, but existential. The Wendigo consumes endlessly, yet never feels full. This eternal dissatisfaction makes it predictable. It hunts constantly, follows scent and sound obsessively, and is drawn to signs of life with reckless focus. Traditional stories emphasize that this obsession blinds the Wendigo, narrowing its awareness and making it vulnerable to those who understand its nature. Cold is often associated with the Wendigo's power, but paradoxically, it is also a source of weakness. The Wendigo is bound to winter, ice, and frozen landscapes, yet fire is repeatedly described as its undoing. Fire represents warmth, community, and renewal, everything the Wendigo lacks. In many traditions, only fire can truly destroy a Wendigo's body and spirit, melting its frozen heart and severing its connection to endless hunger. This opposition between fire and ice is not merely elemental but symbolic. Fire restores balance where cold enforces stagnation. Weapons alone are rarely sufficient. Spears, arrows, or blades may injure the Wendigo, but without ritual context, such wounds are temporary. The myth insists that spiritual imbalance cannot be corrected through physical violence alone. Knowledge is as essential as force. Hunters who confront a Wendigo without preparation often perish, not because they lack courage, but because they misunderstand what they face. This emphasis on knowledge elevates the role of ritual specialists, shamans, medicine people, and elders. These individuals are trained not only in practical skills, but in spiritual perception. They recognize signs of Wendigo influence before transformation is complete, and understand the rituals required to intervene. Their work is preventative as much as reactive. Prevention is, in many traditions, more important than confrontation. Rituals designed to maintain balance, seasonal ceremonies, fasting practices, communal feasts, and storytelling serve as safeguards against Wendigo emergence. These practices reinforce connection, gratitude, and restraint, counteracting the conditions that give rise to the monster. The Wendigo does not appear in communities that remain vigilant and caring for one another. Dream rituals are particularly significant. Since Wendigo influence often begins in dreams, rituals that protect the dreaming mind are essential. Songs, charms, and prayers may be used to guard sleepers, especially during periods of scarcity. Dreams are treated not as meaningless visions, but as places where spiritual threats can be confronted early. When prevention fails and a Wendigo emerges, response becomes urgent. Stories describe organized hunts involving multiple community members, each with a specific role. Some track, others distract, and others prepare fire or ritual tools. This collective action reinforces the lesson that no one person can face the Wendigo alone. Isolation is its domain. Unity is its enemy. The act of destroying a Wendigo is never celebratory. It is solemn and often accompanied by mourning rituals. The community acknowledges that a human life was lost long before the monster was destroyed. This mourning prevents desensitization to violence and reinforces the gravity of the act. Even when necessary, killing a Wendigo is treated as a tragedy, not a triumph. In some traditions, there are stories of partial redemption, though these are rare and heavily circumscribed. These stories usually involve early intervention before cannibalism occurs. Ritual cleansing, isolation combined with care, and intense spiritual guidance may pull someone back from the brink. Once the Wendigo fully manifests, redemption is no longer possible. This distinction reinforces the importance of early recognition and response. The Wendigo's vulnerability to communal warmth is also emphasized symbolically. It cannot tolerate laughter, shared meals, or sustained human connection. These elements do not merely repel it. They prevent its formation altogether. This reinforces the myth's core message. Humanity is preserved through relationship. Silence and secrecy, by contrast, strengthen Wendigo influence. When people hide their hunger, shame, or fear, they create conditions for isolation. The myth encourages openness, not confession in a punitive sense, but sharing in a supportive one. Suffering acknowledged collectively is less likely to curdle into something destructive. Certain taboos also function as preventative measures. Respect for hunting practices, avoidance of waste, and gratitude rituals ensure that taking life for sustenance does not slide into exploitation. These taboos reinforce the boundary between necessary killing and destructive consumption. The Wendigo exists on the far side of that boundary. Colonial disruption weakened many of these preventative systems. Forced relocation, food dependency, and cultural suppression fractured communal bonds and ritual continuity. In this context, some indigenous thinkers argue that modern forms of Wendigo influence emerged, not as literal monsters, but as cycles of addiction, violence, and despair. The traditional tools for prevention were taken away, leaving communities vulnerable. In response, cultural revitalization movements often emphasize restoring traditional practices as a form of Wendigo resistance. Reviving language, ceremony, and communal governance is framed as a way of re-establishing balance. The Wendigo, once a forest-bound threat, becomes a metaphor for systemic harm, and tradition becomes the antidote. The concept of weakness in the Wendigo myth is thus multifaceted. Physical vulnerabilities exist, but they are secondary to moral and spiritual ones. The Wendigo cannot survive where generosity is practiced consistently. It cannot thrive where people are attentive to one another's well-being. Its greatest weakness is a community that refuses to abandon its values, even under pressure. This framing transforms the myth from a horror story into a philosophy of resistance. The Wendigo is not defeated by superior strength, but by refusal. Refusal to hoard, to isolate, to dehumanize. In this sense, every act of care becomes an act of defiance. The rituals surrounding Wendigo prevention and destruction reinforce continuity with ancestors. They assert that present generations are not alone in facing hardship. Knowledge passed down carries the weight of survival itself. To forget these rituals is not merely cultural loss, it is increased vulnerability. The Wendigo's weaknesses ultimately reflect the values of the cultures that conceived it. Balance, reciprocity, humility, and connection are not abstract ideals, but practical necessities. The myth insists that these values are not optional, even when survival seems to demand otherwise. In modern interpretations, this lesson remains potent. Societies driven by endless consumption, exploitation, and disregard for collective well-being mirror the Wendigo's hunger. The traditional weaknesses, restraint, community, and respect for limits, remain relevant tools for confronting these dangers. The Wendigo myth does not promise safety, it promises awareness. It acknowledges that darkness is possible, even likely under certain conditions, but it also insists that knowledge, shared responsibility, and ethical commitment can hold that darkness in check. In this way, the Wendigo is both a warning and a guide. It shows what happens when humanity is abandoned, and it illuminates the paths that prevent such abandonment from occurring. Its weaknesses are not loopholes to exploit, but lessons to live by. The Wendigo endures not because it is terrifying, but because it is truthful. Long after the last fires burned low in winter lodges where its stories were first told, the Wendigo continues to speak, reshaping itself to fit new eras while retaining the same warning at its core. It is a myth born of cold, hunger, and survival, but it is sustained by something deeper, an understanding of human vulnerability. The Wendigo reminds us that monstrosity is not always imposed from outside. Sometimes it grows quietly from within, fed by fear, isolation, and unchecked desire. What makes the Wendigo distinct among mythological figures is that it does not originate in chaos or evil alone. It begins in need. It arises where survival becomes desperate and moral certainty erodes under pressure. In this way, the Wendigo myth does not flatter humanity. It does not assume inherent goodness or inevitable wisdom. Instead, it acknowledges the reality that extreme conditions can fracture even the strongest social bonds. Yet it also insists that fracture is not fate. Choice remains, even when those choices are painful and limited. Across generations, Native American tribes used the Wendigo not as a tool of superstition, but as a framework for living. Its stories taught restraint in times of hunger, generosity in times of fear, and vigilance in times of isolation. These lessons were not abstract. They were rooted in lived experience, harsh winters, fragile food systems, and the constant necessity of cooperation. The Wendigo myth encoded survival ethics into memory, ensuring that knowledge outlasted any single famine or disaster. The cultural impact of this myth cannot be separated from its moral force. The Wendigo shaped social behavior, reinforced communal responsibility, and provided language for discussing psychological and spiritual collapse long before such concepts were formalized in Western thought. It offered a way to talk about danger without reducing it to individual failure alone. The monster was not simply the person who fell, it was the warning that the community must act before such a fall became irreversible. Colonial interference disrupted these systems, stripping stories of their context and turning them into curiosities, pathologies, or entertainment. In popular culture, the Wendigo was transformed into a spectacle, an antlered predator divorced from its ethical roots. This transformation mirrors the very behavior the myth condemns: consumption without understanding, appropriation without responsibility. Yet even here, the Wendigo persists, resisting complete erasure. Indigenous voices have reclaimed the Wendigo as a symbol of modern imbalance. In this reclaimed form, it no longer walks only in frozen forests. It appears in systems that devour land and labor, in industries that profit from scarcity, in cycles of addiction that hollow communities from the inside. These modern Wendigos are vast, impersonal, and relentless, yet they operate according to the same logic as the old stories. Endless hunger, no satisfaction, and destruction disguised as survival. The relevance of the Wendigo today lies in its insistence on limits. In a world that often celebrates excess, growth without restraint, and survival at any cost, the Wendigo stands as a counter-narrative. It asks, what happens when desire becomes detached from responsibility? It asks whether survival is meaningful if it requires the consumption of others. It asks whether progress that leaves communities broken is progress at all. At the same time, the Wendigo myth resists nihilism. It does not claim that humanity is doomed to become monstrous. Instead, it emphasizes prevention, care, and early intervention. It teaches that warmth, connection, and generosity are not luxuries, but defenses. The monster thrives where people are isolated, ashamed, and silent. It weakens where people gather, share, and speak openly about need. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Wendigo is that humanity is not a static state. It is an ongoing practice. To be human is not merely to exist, but to maintain balance between self and community, need and restraint, survival and ethics. This balance must be renewed constantly, especially in times of crisis. The Wendigo exists to remind us what happens when that renewal fails. In this sense, the myth is not pessimistic. It is demanding. It refuses easy comfort and forces confrontation with uncomfortable truths. It acknowledges that under sufficient pressure, anyone could be tempted by the logic of the Wendigo. The difference lies not in inherent virtue, but in the strength of communal bonds and the willingness to uphold values when they are most difficult to maintain. The Wendigo story also underscores the importance of remembering. Forgetting, whether of tradition, responsibility, or shared humanity, is itself a form of hunger. When stories are lost, the knowledge they carry disappears with them. The revival and preservation of Wendigo narratives, told with respect and context, is therefore not an exercise in nostalgia. It is an act of cultural survival. As climate instability, resource scarcity, and social fragmentation increasingly define the modern world, the conditions that birthed the Wendigo myth no longer feel distant. Hunger takes new forms, but its effects are familiar. Isolation persists, even in crowded societies. Greed is often rewarded rather than restrained. In this landscape, the Wendigo speaks with renewed urgency. Yet the myth does not end with despair. It ends with responsibility. The Wendigo can be resisted. It can be prevented. Its power depends on neglect of one another, of tradition, of ethical limits. Where people choose connection over consumption and care over fear, the Wendigo starves. In the end, the Wendigo is not merely a monster of the past. It is a mirror held up to every society facing scarcity and choice. It asks what we will become when tested. The answer, as the stories insist, is never predetermined. It is shaped, moment by moment, by how we treat one another when survival is on the line. And that, perhaps, is why the Wendigo still walks. Not because it must, but because we still need to remember what it means to keep it at bay. Even after the last words of the story are spoken, the Wendigo does not vanish. It lingers in silence, in the spaces where people hesitate to look too closely at their own desires and fears. This lingering presence is not a failure of the myth to resolve itself, but its final lesson. The Wendigo was never meant to be neatly contained. It was meant to stay just close enough to be remembered. In traditional contexts, the end of a Wendigo story was often followed by quiet rather than discussion. That quiet mattered. It allowed listeners to sit with discomfort, to internalize the warning without immediately deflecting it. The monster was not dismissed with relief. It was acknowledged as a possibility that required vigilance. Modern audiences, accustomed to closure and reassurance, may find this unsettling. Yet that unease is precisely the point. The Wendigo challenges a deeply ingrained assumption in many contemporary cultures, that progress inevitably leads away from darkness. The myth insists otherwise. It suggests that technological advancement, abundance, or complexity do not eliminate the risk of moral collapse. In fact, they may disguise it. The Wendigo does not require ignorance to thrive. It requires justification. This is why the Wendigo adapts so easily to new contexts. It does not depend on snow or forest, though those environments shaped its earliest forms. It depends on conditions where people begin to see others as expendable, where systems reward accumulation without accountability, and where suffering is normalized rather than shared. In such environments, the Wendigo does not need claw. It needs indifference. For indigenous communities, the continued relevance of the Wendigo is inseparable from the survival of cultural memory. To remember the Wendigo properly is not to sensationalize it, but to understand its place within a broader worldview, one that values balance over domination and responsibility over entitlement. When that worldview is ignored or stripped of context, the myth loses its protective power and becomes merely frightening rather than instructive. This distinction matters. A frightening monster can be consumed as entertainment. A meaningful one demands reflection. The Wendigo was never meant to be enjoyed. It was meant to be respected, approached carefully, and spoken of with intention. To tell the story incorrectly is not just inaccurate. It weakens the lesson. The endurance of the Wendigo myth is a testament to the sophistication of the cultures that created it. Long before modern debates about ethics, sustainability, and collective responsibility, These societies articulated a warning that remains urgently relevant. They understood that hunger is not always physical, that danger does not always arrive from outside, and that survival without values is a hollow victory. In the end, the Wendigo asks something simple and difficult. Not whether we can endure hardship, but how. It asks what we are willing to consume to survive, and what we refuse to consume even when survival is at stake. It reminds us that the line between human and monster is not drawn by strength, but by choice.